You step up to the bank, size up the water, and make what feels like the perfect cast. The lure lands exactly where it should, right on the edge of a beautiful shallow rock transition, meeting a weed line in about 6 feet of water. The spot looks flawless, resembling every textbook picture of prime fishing water you have ever seen. You retrieve your jig methodically, keeping it right in the strike zone, but nothing happens. Not a bump, not a follow, not a flash. You cast again, change your retrieve speed, and maybe even tie on a different color, but still, nothing connects. The immediate reaction for most beginners is to assume the lure is wrong, the retrieve is off, or the lake is simply empty. But the reality is far more rigid than that, because the problem isn't your bait, and it isn't your technique. The problem is that the fish literally cannot be there right now. Walleyes are not built like other predatory fish, and understanding their biology is the only way to consistently catch them from the bank. If you cast into shallow water under a bright midday sun, you're fighting their anatomy. Walleyes possess a highly specialized reflective layer behind their retina called the tapetum lucidum, which amplifies available light, allowing them to hunt effectively in near total darkness. But that incredible nighttime advantage comes with a severe daytime penalty. In bright, calm conditions, the sunlight penetrating shallow water is physically uncomfortable and disorienting to a walleye, meaning their eyes cannot handle the intensity. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly when to target these shallow zones, how to read the environmental signals that open these feeding windows, and why the wind is the ultimate decider of where a walleye positions itself. The breakdown today covers 3 specific elements that dictate walleye behavior in shallow water. First, we will examine how light penetration establishes a hard ceiling on where these fish can comfortably swim. Second, we will look at the mechanics of walleye chop, and how surface agitation completely rewrites the rules of daytime depth. Finally, we will cover the commute, how walleyes use structural highways to transition from their deep daytime holding areas to their shallow nighttime feeding grounds. None of this requires a boat or expensive sonar equipment. It only requires observation. The invisible cost of misunderstanding this biological limitation is massive. It is not just about missing a fish on a single cast. It is about wasting your most valuable resource on the water, which is your time. When you target shallow structure at the wrong time of day, you erode your own confidence. You start second-guessing your lure choices. You lose faith in your ability to read the water, and worst of all, you permanently cross a fantastic spot off your mental map. The tragedy of bank fishing for walleye is the angler who abandons a perfect rocky point at 2 in the afternoon, assuming it holds no fish. That angler leaves frustrated, never realizing that if they had simply waited until the sun touched the tree line, that exact same spot would transform into a chaotic feeding zone. The spot did not fail. The timing failed, because you were fishing the right water in the wrong window. To stop wasting time and start intersecting these fish when they are actually willing to eat, you need to stop guessing and start processing the water through a sequence of specific questions. Every time you approach a bank, before you ever unhook your lure from the rod guide, you need to ask yourself what the environment is allowing the fish to do. The first and most critical question you must ask is, what is the light penetration doing right now? Light is the absolute dictator of walleye movement. Because of the tapetum lucidum, a walleye's vision is optimized for low-light environments. During a bluebird day with 0 cloud cover and flat, calm water, the sun's rays penetrate deep into the water column. In clear lakes, this intense light forces walleyes to retreat into depths of 20, 30, or even 40 feet just to find a comfortable darkness. They will tuck themselves tight to the bottom or bury themselves deep within thick weed beds where the canopy provides shade. If you're standing on the bank looking at a pristine shallow sand flat in 5 feet of water at high noon, you can confidently walk right past it. The test here is simple. Look at the water in front of you. If you can clearly see the bottom features, the rocks, and the individual weed stalks in 6 feet of water, the light is too intense. A walleye will not expose itself to that environment unless absolutely forced to, meaning they are holding deep, and your shallow casts are landing in empty water. The second question completely alters the answer to the first one. Is the surface of the water broken or glass calm? This is where the most important weather variable in walleye fishing comes into play. If you have spent any time around experienced walleye anglers, you have probably heard the term walleye chop. This refers to wind conditions, typically blowing between 6 and 16 miles per hour, that create consistent, rolling waves on the surface. Wind is not just a nuisance that makes casting difficult. It is a structural element in the water. When the wind creates a heavy chop on the surface, it shatters the sunlight. Instead of piercing straight through the water column, the light is refracted, scattered, and blocked by the turbulent surface. This significantly reduces light penetration, meaning a shallow flat in 5 feet of water with a heavy walleye chop rolling across it suddenly has the same low-light environment at the bottom as a 20-foot hole on a calm day. But the wind does more than just dim the lights. It creates a powerful mechanical advantage for the predator. As the waves crash into a shallow bank, they churn up the sediment, turning the water slightly murky. This reduced visibility completely disorients small bait fish, disrupting their schooling patterns and making them vulnerable. The walleye, utilizing both its highly adapted low-light vision and its sensitive lateral line, thrives in this chaos. The test on the bank is to look at the shoreline orientation. If the wind is blowing directly into the bank you're standing on, crashing waves against the rocks and muddying the first 10 feet of water, the shallow bite is instantly in play, regardless of what the clock says. If the wind is at your back, leaving the water at your feet calm and clear, you're on the wrong side of the lake for daytime shallow feeding. The third question addresses the geography of the spot. Where is the nearest deep water access? Walleyes do not live in the shallows permanently. They commute there to eat. Think of the deep basin as their bedroom and the shallow rocky flat as their kitchen. They will only use a kitchen if there is a safe, quick hallway connecting the two. If you're casting into a massive, sprawling shallow bay that remains 5 feet deep for hundreds of yards in every direction, you're unlikely to find consistent walleye action from the bank. The fish feel too exposed, making that long of a journey away from their deep water sanctuary. The highest percentage shallow water spots are those immediately adjacent to a sharp drop-off. They want to hold in 20 feet of water during the day, slowly rise up the vertical ledge as the light fades, and slide right onto the shallow shelf to hunt. When you are assessing a bank, you need to visualize the underwater topography. A rocky point jutting out into the lake is a classic example, where the point itself might only be 4 feet deep, but the sides of that point likely plunge into the main lake basin. The test is in your retrieve. Cast straight out and drag a heavy jig slowly along the bottom. If you feel your bait dragging through shallow water for the entire cast, it is a low percentage spot. But if you cast out, let it sink for several seconds, and feel it climb up a steep ledge before hitting the shallow flat near your feet, you have found the highway. That transition line, where the deep water meets the shallow shelf, is the exact ambush point you need to target. The final question dictating your strategy is it transition time? If the wind is dead calm and the water is crystal clear, you are entirely dependent on the sun to create the low-light conditions the walleye require. This brings us to the crepuscular feeding windows, dawn and dusk. As the sun dips below the tree line in the evening, the angle of the light changes, drastically reducing penetration into the water column. This triggers a biological alarm clock in the walleye, because as the shallows fall into shadow, the bait fish lose their visual advantage. Meanwhile, the walleye's tapetum lucidum kicks into overdrive, giving them supreme hunting capabilities in the fading light. This transition period is often fast and furious, with the fish moving as a pack and aggressively pushing bait fish against the shoreline. The test for the angler is environmental observation. When you start to lose the contrast in the trees across the lake, when you have to squint to tie a new knot, and when the bright colors of your lure begin to look muted in the air, the window is opening. This is when you want your bait in that 3 to 8 foot depth range, positioned right on top of that structural highway you found earlier. Everything we have covered regarding light penetration, wind chop, and depth transitions points to a fundamental shift in how you should view a fishing spot. The biggest mistake you can make is not throwing the wrong lure, but walking away from the right water with a permanent conclusion based on temporary conditions. The behavioral twist here is knowing when a spot has actually been tested. If you fish a beautiful rocky point with a sharp drop-off at 1 in the afternoon under a bright, calm sky, and you catch nothing, you have not proven that the spot is empty. You have only proven that the biological conditions were wrong. The secret to bank fishing for walleye is recycling your locations. You do not need to constantly hike miles looking for new water. You need to identify 3 or 4 structurally perfect spots where shallow flats meet deep access and rotate through them as the environmental conditions change. You leave the shallow rock pile in the afternoon. Shift your focus to casting heavy jigs into the deepest water you can reach, and then you absolutely must return to that same shallow rock pile as the sun begins to set. You're not walking away because the spot is bad. You're walking away to let the Earth's rotation fix the light problem for you. If you have spent hours casting from the bank, getting frustrated because the textbook spots look perfect but fail to produce, you're not alone. Most anglers go through this exact cycle of buying new lures and changing retrieves, never realizing they are just fighting the biology of the fish. If learning to read the environment, understand fish anatomy, and make decisions based on real water conditions makes sense to you, subscribing to this channel is the easiest way to make sure you catch the next breakdown. The theories of light penetration and structural transitions only matter if you put them to the test. On your next trip to the lake, do not overcomplicate your tackle. Bring one rod and one reliable presentation, like a jig tipped with a plastic swim bait or a minnow profile. Find one specific spot on the bank where a shallow rock or gravel area drops sharply into deep water. Fish that spot at midday when the sun is high and the water is calm, and take note of the complete lack of activity. Then, go fish elsewhere. Return to that exact same spot, standing on the exact same footprints, 1 hour before sunset. Make the exact same cast with the exact same lure. The water will not have changed. The structure will not have moved, but the fish's biological ability to tolerate that shallow zone will have completely reversed. That is the only experiment you need to run to understand how these fish operate.